Good evening, dear friends. Assalamu alaikum. Give you the greeting of peace. First of all, I'd like to thank the Bloody Sunday Committee for inviting me to speak to you here. You know, I've said this several times, but I have to say it again. This is the only place that I can come and feel like a novice, completely. That my experiences have been dwarfed by what I've heard. And every time I hear something, it seems that I know nothing of what's taken place here. The resilience that exists within this community, whether it's for people that's been interned without trial or under a bogus trial like Joanne has just spoken about, it seems to me here that the strength based upon the experience of fighting injustice is contagious. I know that the campaigns are never as big as you want them to be, but if you tried to do some of this stuff with my community back in England, and you spoke about somebody that's been convicted in an open court of law for a serious crime, you won't get anybody coming to listen to them. They'll be completely shunned and alienated. It doesn't matter if there was due process or no due process. It doesn't matter if the evidence was concocted. It doesn't matter if it's a miscarriage of justice. Nobody wants to raise their head above the parapet because they're too afraid of being targeted. Here, what I find is a resilience that said, we don't care if you call us terrorist sympathizers. We don't care if you call us radicals. We don't care whatever you call us. Our fight for justice is based upon our experience and what we've seen of you. And you're in no moral position to try to tell us who we are. Just before I came here, I had a call from the Associated Press, and they said that President Trump, can you even imagine saying that, President Trump? They don't fit together, but there you go. It's an oxymoron. Has issued an executive order ordering for the reopening of the CIA black detention sites, the black sites, the torture sites. Remember in 2015, or 2014, late 2014, the United States Senate issued a report in which they admitted, imagine only governments can do this, admitted torturing over 119 prisoners with some of the methods that Francie had mentioned. And saying literally, we've done this, we've come up clean about it, thank you very much, no one's going to get prosecuted. Torture is a crime. False imprisonment is a crime. Kidnap is a crime. Yet, it seems, past and present governments can get away with it. So if Trump is going to reinstate torture as a policy, and is going to fill up Guantanamo as he said, and he said that waterboarding, which is a technique that was used in the Spanish Inquisition against heretics, against Muslims, against Jews, it was a technique by which a person is put and tied on a board, literally, and water is poured over their nose and their mouth, and they're tied down, their heads and their arms and their legs, and they're made to feel like they're drowning, even though they're not submerged. He said that, this is called, in Spanish, it's called tortura del agua, torture of the water. The Bush administration said it's not torture, it's enhanced interrogation techniques. Japanese soldiers who waterboarded American GIs during World War II were prosecuted for war crimes and executed as a result of waterboarding them. Now, we're in 2017, the 21st century. The most powerful people in the world are arguing to say, no, this is not torture, this is enhanced interrogation techniques. When Francie was talking about some of the techniques that he called the 5 techniques, and the 6th as well, it was almost as if it was completely mirrored. The slight difference was this, the white noise, though he called it the music room, and that's interesting because when we were subjected to torture, one of the techniques they used on us, as well as what they call short shackling, which is when they tie you to the ground and put you into a stress position, as well as the threats, as well as the beatings, as well as the sleep deprivation, as well as the food deprivation, they didn't use white noise, they just used loud noise. And that was the kind of, I don't know what you call it, but those of you who listen to this really, really heavy metal rock music, that they blast so loud and continuously that you simply can't hear yourself think. And in the beginning, I jokingly say, turn that crap off, we'll talk. But for a lot of the prisoners who were from the Middle East and the Arab world, they were not used to this type of music in any way at all. So it was doubly more difficult for them to deal with. And in a state where you've already been dehumanized, you've been shaved, you've been punched and kicked. If you were to look in the mirror and after they've shaved your hair and your beard, you wouldn't even recognize yourself. And then to be put into boiler suits or jumpsuits, that's something exactly that happened with us. We weren't put into, some of us were taken into helicopters, and some did mention to me that they thought they were going to get thrown off them. But it wasn't exactly in the same way. But I can see very clearly the parallels, and as Francie has alluded to, that it began from a justification that was somehow said that cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, oh, that's okay. No, it's not. It's illegal. It's against it's stated within the United Nations Conventions Against Torture and Cruel, Inhuman, and Degrading Treatment. So when I think about that period and walked the streets as I did today of Derry and saw the murals and saw again inside the Museum of Free Derry how people are still affected to this day. I mean, I can't get over the fact still. I relate my story sometimes and talk about it, but find it hard. And I'm listening to Francie, he's relating his story with not a single note in front of him. It's as if it was yesterday. And to relive this decades on, I mean, for me, it was still within this decade or just less. But to relive this story for the Bloody Sunday family victims and their relatives, and for the people who were interned and with the hooded men were tortured, to have to relive this in order to fight for justice. A, is commendable that you do this because it's traumatic. That in itself is a form of torture in my view. But to relive this continuously, only to seek justice, is something that I don't know if I could do this 40 years later. I honestly don't. I don't know if I would have it in me. It takes a huge amount out of you just to relive moments, some of the most difficult moments you've ever faced in your life. When I was listening to Francie, I felt like crying, but I'm not going to cry in front of everyone. But it reminded me of one of the worst things that you can ever encounter isn't your own torture, but the knowledge that somebody else is getting tortured in front of you and you can't do anything about it. When he spoke of resistance and, let's give them a tough time, let's support our comrades, our friends, even though they were in separate rooms, I know what he was talking about. In fact, when I was held by the CIA and the British were there, the British intelligence services were physically present, I was tied up, my hands behind my back one day in May 2002, tied to my legs, hog-tied. I had a hood placed over my head, I'd been punched and kicked, and they threatened me first of all and said that if you don't cooperate with us, we will send you either to Egypt or to Syria. And anybody knows from that part of the world at that time that if you're going to be sent to these places, that's where they kind of mastered some of the arts of torture and where you outsource torture without ever getting your hands dirty. So that was part of the threat. But in addition to that, again, the notion that something's happening right there. I didn't know what happened to my wife and kids the night that they kidnapped me from my home. She was in Pakistan at the time. But I'd assumed that they'd gone home or they'd gone back to the UK or something, that they were safe. I'd assumed that. And then I heard the sound of a woman screaming next door. I mean, screams like that would make your blood curdle. And I thought it must be some female prisoner. They then presented pictures of my family, my wife, my kids that they'd seized from my house. My kids were just young at the time, they were 2, 3, and 4. And they said, what do you think happened to your wife and kids the night we took you? Where do you think they are right now? Who do you think is that? Who do you think that is in the room next door to you? And I'm listening to these screams. And I've never heard anybody scream like that, let alone my wife. So I don't know if it's her for sure. But everything they're alluding to is that it's her next door. And all the other prisoners afterwards that spoke to me. They said, we thought it was your wife being tortured. Now, there's a part of the physical torture that we don't often recognize properly, and that's the psychological aspect, the aspect that's designed to break you as a man, to break you as a woman, to make you more pliant and compliant, in order that you end up relying on your interrogator. Your abuser, your oppressor, your tormentor is the only person from whom you can seek redress. You can seek salvation, that he'll come and he'll rescue you. The very person who's doing it to you. And you hear these stories like a rapist or an abuser will do something to somebody and then say, look, I'll help you. I'm here to help you. And that's what they were doing. The hardest thing for me, it's a baptism of fire, realization. It wasn't that this is happening to me. I saw it happening to many other people, and I told you that this was very difficult to watch. But the hardest thing was to see or to know that there are British intelligence agents taking part in what took place. In fact, let me tell you a little story that was shocking to me. In 1999, an MI5 agent called Andrew turned up at my doorstep at my house about 6 a.m., knocked the door with somebody else, and he came. And he said, we've come to speak to you about an individual who wrote a letter to you from the Emirates. And this individual had been detained in the Emirates, wrote a letter to me who I'd known, and asked me to help to find a lawyer for him because he said he'd been tortured into giving false evidence and was being accused of terrorism. That's the first time I approached my lawyer, who you all know, Gareth Pearce, about his case. And I went and told her. And she told me this presciently. She said, listen, Moazzam, I'm telling you, I'm warning you now. It was the Irish before, it's your turn's next. And that was 1999, before the beginning of the War on Terror. She was right. And so what happened is this guy, Andrew, he turned up at my doorstep, asked me about this individual who'd written to me. And we spoke for a while, and then he left. The next time I saw Andrew was in the Kandahar prison facility that the Americans had opened after they invaded Afghanistan, where they'd physically, forcibly taken me from my house in Pakistan. And I was kneeling with my hands behind my back, shackled, with a hood over my head and guns pointing towards me. When the hood was lifted, I saw Andrew sitting right in front of me. So, and since then, from that point onwards, at various junctures in my detention, Andrew, being a spook, haunted me in Guantanamo several times. The part about this, that most people would think that, the security services, how are you going to challenge them? What are you going to do? How are you going to face them up? What tools can you use to fight injustice and oppression, especially because when governments do something, everybody believes governments can't do any wrong, especially if they're governments that espouse habeas corpus and talk all day long about Magna Carta and these rights enshrined within our legal system, that no man will be subjected to arbitrary detention except they'll be judged by a court of their peers. When they talk about this and bamboozle the rest of the world about how everybody's rights are protected, how are you going to fight this? How are you going to challenge this, especially when the population is not on your side? The Daily Mail is not on your side. The Sun is not on your side. In fact, these are the most widely read newspapers in the country. You're doomed. But then there are cases of people who make a huge difference. One person sometimes makes a huge difference in challenging the system and what they say and do as a result of what they've experienced. And one of those people that I came across was Jerry Codman. I met him the first time on stage in London at a Marxism discussion. And between me and him was Gareth Pearce. Literally, both metaphorically and literally, she was there. And she saw that mirrored experience coming back again, what had happened to Jerry, and the Birmingham 6, and the Maguire 7, and the Guildford 4, and all of the other people who've been targeted and unjustly imprisoned. If we, as former prisoners remain silent, and many prisoners do, because it is so traumatic. Nobody would fault them for saying, you know, I've had enough, I don't want to cause trouble, and I don't want any trouble coming to me. You can't fault them for that. You can't say, no, you must, because it's traumatic. But if we remain silent, if we said nothing, then everybody, the world, would be saying that our experiences didn't happen. That Guantanamo, that Long Kesh, that the H blocks, all of these places, the hooded men's cases, Bagram, Abu Ghraib, every torture, past or present, every internment, past or present, was okay. Because that's what the government had been saying anyway. We needed to do this. We were fighting terrorism. We were protecting your security. So as a result of that, what we had to do was to take bold steps and, you know, twist a few arms maybe, but we never really tortured anybody because our definitions of torture don't fit. By the way, the US administration under Bush, and I mean the most senior legal advisor to the government, Alberto Gonzales, the US Attorney General, argued to say that if it doesn't include severe physical impairment, organ failure, or death, it's not torture. So essentially pulling out a fingernail, essentially breaking somebody's arm, waterboarding, all of the techniques we've mentioned here, they're not torture. And it comes back to the justification, the legal, you've got lawyers that have been complicit in this, high-ranking lawyers who said that this is not torture. What these people have been subjected to was necessary in the fight against terrorism, past or present. So, there's another thing that's going on that perhaps, I don't know to what degree it's being felt over here. I still need to investigate and speak to a lot of people here. But over the past, since the beginning of the war on terror, there have been over 14 pieces of anti-terror legislation passed in the UK. They began with the internment of people. 16 Middle Eastern and North African men were interned without charge or trial in Belmarsh from 2002 to 2005. The House of Lords ruled that their detention had been unconstitutional. They were released, but then another law was passed which allowed for them to be placed under effectively house arrest, control orders. And they remained in power and place for several years. Now, control orders includes severe restriction of movement, no access to the internet, no access to telephones, no access to any visitors at all except by Home Office approval, and that includes your kids and their friends and children. So imagine the destructive, corrosive effect that has on the household with kids who essentially say, you know, we prefer when dad was in prison. We don't like dad being here. I can't do my homework. I don't have access to the internet. You see, and that destroys families. And it did. It destroyed several families. They eventually found that aspects of that, including internal exile. I mean, this stuff sounds like something out of a despotic regime somewhere in Asia or Africa. You wouldn't think that this is Britain, but this stuff's been going on. And in the most recent, there was in 2006, the Glorification of Terrorism Act was passed, whereby people who wrote poetry, I kid you not, poetry, were imprisoned for glorifying terrorism. People who published books that were written sometimes, in some cases, in the 8th century AD, were imprisoned for publication of books that were condoning or supporting terrorism. And then the most, I think, Stasi-like law that's been passed in this country that I can think of was the 2015 Counterterrorism and Security Act. Now, I really want to know, because I think that it may well come here in terms of its application. And this is, according to this law, teachers, lecturers, doctors, nurses, prison officers, anybody in the public sector essentially, has a legal duty. They are bound by law to report anyone they think, under their auspices, is becoming a radical extremist. Not a violent extremist, but a radical extremist. How do you determine a person's extremism? Based upon what? That they want troops out of Iraq, Afghanistan? They want a united Ireland? How do you determine it? What are your markers? And so this is something that's happening in England and Scotland to a great degree, and Wales, a hell of a lot. You've got the National Union of Teachers, the numerous politicians as well, National Union of Students, all who've come out against it because they say this is a law that is making us into spies. And the students are saying this is making us into suspects, not students. And these are the sorts of laws now that are being passed in a world where we find, and this is going to be important for us in days and years to come, Donald Trump, whatever you want to say about him, is, I believe, going to follow through with many of the things that he said. He's going to shake up the status quo. One of the things he's going to do is he's going to bring back torture. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind about it. And you can see that by the appointment of foreign secretaries and home secretaries and so forth, and what sort of hawks he's put into power. The question is going to be this, is that Britain is a country that, at least on paper, says that it does not condone the use of torture. It does not use torture evidence in courts. It does not accept torture in any way. It's abhorrent to British values. What's it going to do? Because you see, the past government had said we tortured and we're going to stop. The government before that under Bush said it's not torture, it's enhanced interrogation techniques. This guy says, well, I'm going to do it regardless. What are we going to do with our best friend across the water who endorses criminality and war crimes? What are we going to do? That's going to be the test, because I think the abuses in the war on terror are going to multiply. And again, I say once again, listening to your testimony, after all of these years, you're still fighting for justice. Finally, one person is being charged, and that the cases can be heard in court, and so forth. For one person being charged for being involved in the Bloody Sunday massacre. Think about this. We talk about the Nazi hunters that go on for decades and decades and decades. If they're 90 or 100 years old, they're still going for them. And on the other hand, you've got soldiers who carried out these crimes in living memory, who the right-wing press will say, no, they need to be left alone. Why are you troubling these old men who, after all they were doing was their duty? But I say, isn't that exactly what the Nazi concentration camp guards said at Nuremberg? It didn't afford them a defense. Thank you.